The Commonwealth's secret vote was more than a decision. It was a defiance that left Camilla shattered and Catherine stunned. What really happened behind closed doors at that historic summit? The air inside the grand hall was thick with unease, the kind of silence that seemed to hum with centuries of expectation. Delegates from every corner of the Commonwealth filed into their seats beneath banners of tradition, yet no one dared to make eye contact for too long. Outside, the restless crowd pressed against the gates, their chants muffled but growing louder by the minute. They sensed something was coming. And inside, Catherine and Camilla arrived within moments of each other, their entrances sending shivers through the room. Catherine's soft nods and quiet grace contrasted starkly with Camilla's stiff, almost defiant demeanor. For all the cameras that flashed as they entered, neither woman looked at the other, though those nearby caught the sharp, icy glances exchanged when no one else seemed to be watching. Whispers darted through the hall like sparks leaping from dry kindling, murmurs of an agenda that went far beyond ceremonial pleasantries. Early in the day, a hush fell over the chamber when one of the more senior officials leaned in to murmur into another's ear. A note passed discreetly, then another, and another, the words spreading like wildfire. Something monumental is brewing. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward the gilded dais where King Charles was meant to preside. But when the heavy oak doors finally creaked open, it wasn't Charles who entered first. Rather, it was a pale and visibly nervous royal aide who delivered a single sentence that changed the energy of the room entirely. "His Majesty will join you shortly." In his private chambers just beyond the hall, Charles was seen pacing, stopping only to rest his hands on the windowsill and stare into the gardens below. Those who dared to venture near reported hearing him whisper to himself, "It shouldn't come to this, not like this." His advisors hovered helplessly, offering no solutions, only uneasy silence. It was clear even to the most loyal of aides that the king was wrestling not just with the weight of a father's love and a husband's loyalty, but with the crown's survival itself. And then, as though the room needed one final nudge into chaos, the press got wind of the secret deliberations. Phones buzzed, journalists sprinted from their seats, and outside, news vans began assembling in droves. A headline appeared in bold on the screens above the hall, impossible to ignore: "Vote on future queen imminent." The public, who had waited patiently outside for hours, erupted at the news. Some cheered, some jeered, and some wept openly as speculation ran rampant about what this would mean for the monarchy. Guards were forced to form a tighter perimeter as the chants rose louder. "Catherine! Catherine!" And then moments later, an equally fervent, "Camilla forever!" But as whispers turned into roars, the weight of centuries of tradition collided with a new vision of the monarchy, and the first shocking vote came in. Behind the palace doors, Camilla's rage simmered while Catherine wore the mask of composure, but inside, both women knew the stakes couldn't be higher. The corridors of the palace seemed colder that evening, the echoes of history mingling with whispered conspiracies. Camilla's fury had reached a quiet boil, and though she smiled for the cameras earlier in the day, in private she unleashed her rage upon her closest advisors. Her voice, low but trembling with anger, cut through the heavy silence of her chamber. Pushed aside like some afterthought, she hissed. One advisor dared to assure her that nothing was final yet, but she snapped back. "It's already done. Can't you see? They've all made up their minds. This vote is nothing but theater." When another attempted to calm her, she fixed him with a cold stare and muttered that if this went through, she'd make sure the family paid for it. While Camilla raged, Catherine sat alone with William in their private sitting room. She clutched his hand tightly, her voice barely above a whisper as she confessed, "I never wanted to hurt her." William, visibly torn, reassured her with empty words, but the tension between them spoke louder than anything he could say. Catherine admitted that she'd seen the sadness in Camilla's eyes when the verdict was read aloud earlier, and felt a pang of guilt, but then she added, more firmly, "This isn't about me anymore. They chose. And we can't undo what's been set in motion." Elsewhere, staff passing through the corridors couldn't help but overhear Camilla's bitter words. One attendant recounted hearing her mutter to herself that the vote was a farce designed to humiliate her. Even those who were loyal to her looked at one another nervously, realizing the queen consort they knew had been wounded in a way no crown could heal. Later that night, Catherine slipped away from the noise of the evening banquet to find solace in the gardens. The quiet didn't calm her as she'd hoped instead. It magnified the weight she carried. She stood beneath the ancient oaks, clutching her fingers tightly, as if willing herself to remain steady. In that moment, memories of Diana flooded her mind. Diana, who had walked these same gardens, who had endured the same suffocating scrutiny, who had been torn apart by the same impossible expectations. Catherine whispered to herself, "I can't let her down now." When she finally returned to the banquet, the air was sharp with unspoken hostilities. Every subtle glance between her and Camilla crackled with tension. When their eyes met, neither woman flinched, but those watching could feel the chill pass between them, a silent battle waged behind controlled smiles. The clinking of glasses and polite laughter couldn't drown out the storm brewing beneath the surface. And just when Camilla believed she still held the upper hand, a stunning announcement from the vote sent shockwaves through the room. In a thunderous moment, representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth stood together and uttered the words no one thought they'd dare say. The hall had grown so tense it seemed even the walls held their breath. Delegates rose one by one, their faces grave, their hands steady, as they placed their votes into the gilded box at the center of the room. When the final ballot was cast, the clerk stood motionless for a long moment before unsealing the envelope. As he cleared his throat, the sound seemed to slice through the silence. Then came the words that would forever mark this day in royal history. "We, the Commonwealth, trust Catherine as our future queen." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the sharp inhale of disbelief rippled through the room like a wave. A collective gasp broke the spell, followed by a heavy, disorienting quiet. It hung in the air for what felt like hours, before scattered applause began to erupt, hesitant at first, then louder, as the realization of what had just occurred settled on every face in the room. This was not simply a declaration of preference. This was an act of rebellion wrapped in the language of trust. Camilla stood frozen where she was, her hands gripping the table before her so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Those close enough to see her face would later say they saw her trembling, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. But she did not look away from the dais, and she did not bow her head. In that moment, she clung fiercely to the dignity that was slipping from her grasp. Catherine, too, was visibly shaken, though she masked it as best she could. The weight of the words struck her like a hammer, and though she kept her posture regal, her fingers flexed slightly at her side, as though she needed something to anchor herself. Beneath her calm exterior, a storm churned. Disbelief, fear, a quiet defiance. Outside, the media frenzy exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another as headlines flashed across every screen, "Catherine chosen over Camilla!" Crowds outside the palace gates erupted into cheers and chants of her name. Yet even as they celebrated, others stood in stunned silence, the implications sinking in like stone. Charles remained seated at the head of the room, his face a mask of conflict. To those watching closely, he seemed almost divided in two, a man caught between loyalty to his wife and duty to his people. His eyes darted from Camilla to Catherine, and then to the floor. No words came, only the faint clenching of his jaw. Yet this decision was not merely symbolic. It set into motion a series of private confrontations that would tear at the very fabric of the royal family. Hours after the vote, King Charles summoned Catherine into his private study and revealed a secret that could change her fate forever. The corridors felt unusually long as Catherine made her way to him, her steps slow, deliberate, yet weighed down by the gravity of what had just transpired. When she finally entered the study, she found Charles standing with his back to the door, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, shoulders trembling. The soft sound of the door closing behind her seemed to snap him out of his trance. He turned, and in the dim light, she could see his eyes glistening. There were no formalities, no rehearsed speeches. Just a man undone by the impossible choices thrust upon him. His voice cracked as he admitted, almost in a whisper, "I knew this was coming. I saw it building, and I couldn't stop it." Catherine froze, unsure what to say, the weight of his confession settling heavily between them. He gestured weakly toward a stack of papers on his desk. "Letters," he muttered, before collapsing into his chair. "Dozens of them. Warnings from my aides, petitions from within the Commonwealth, even whispers from foreign monarchs, all telling me the same thing, that they trust you, that they prefer you." His words carried both awe and bitterness, and he wiped at his eyes as though ashamed to let her see his tears. For a moment, Catherine considered softening the blow, telling him she had never intended to overshadow Camilla, never sought the throne so directly. But before she could speak, Charles raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't patronize me," he said, though his tone was not cruel. It was weary, defeated. "You didn't orchestrate this, Catherine, but you embody it. The people see something in you, something they no longer see in her. And that," he paused, staring into the middle distance, "is not something I can fight." Catherine lowered her eyes and finally spoke, her voice quiet yet steady. "Your Majesty, I never sought this. I never wanted to take her place. This was not my ambition." But Charles only gave her a sad smile, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what you wanted. It only matters what they see." Then, after a long silence, his voice dropped to a near whisper, "You've made enemies tonight, powerful ones, and they will not forget this." As Catherine stood there, her hands trembling, he reached toward the stack of letters and pulled one free, sliding it across the polished wood toward her. "This came yesterday," he said, "from the King of Spain, offering his public support to you over Camilla." His words hung heavy in the air, revealing just how far the rift extended beyond their walls. But even as Charles wrestled with his conscience, Camilla was already plotting her next move, and it was far from graceful. What the cameras didn't catch that night was Camilla's desperate scramble to reclaim her dignity and her throne. Moments after the vote was announced and the room erupted into shock and whispers, Camilla vanished. Slipping quietly from the banquet hall, she retreated into a side room where a handful of senior aides were already waiting for her. The door closed sharply behind her, sealing them off from the celebration beyond. What followed was not the silence of defeat, but the crackle of anger and resolve. In a low, shaking voice, she barked orders at her aides, demanding names of dissenters, demanding numbers, demanding options. One aide tried to temper her fury, reminding her the vote was unanimous. But she cut him off with a bitter laugh and snapped, "Nothing is ever truly unanimous." Within minutes, she was on the phone, her voice sharp, her words carefully chosen yet laced with venom. Those nearby caught snippets of the conversation's calls to influential allies across the Commonwealth, allies she had cultivated for decades. "You cannot allow this insult to stand," she hissed into the receiver, then into another call. "You owe me loyalty after everything I've done for you." One by one, her allies faltered under the weight of her demands, yet none dared to promise her what she truly sought. Still, Camilla refused to accept what she saw as a betrayal. To those who remained in the room, she declared in a tone so icy it chilled even her most loyal advisor, "This isn't over." Not yet. Those words clung to the air long after she hung up the final call. Later that evening, she tried to rally family members, reaching out to cousins, nieces, and nephews in an attempt to shore up some visible support. But each conversation seemed to leave her more isolated than before. Whispers already circulating through the palace made it clear that many were quietly aligning themselves with Catherine, if not out of loyalty, then out of survival. Rumors began to swirl almost immediately, carried by the lips of staff who dared to listen outside her door. It was said that Camilla, in her frustration, threatened to expose royal secrets so dangerous they could splinter the monarchy if revealed. One attendant claimed to have heard her mutter, "If they want to destroy me, I'll burn this whole family down with me." And when another aide attempted to calm her, she turned on him with a chilling glare and seethed, "They will regret crossing me." And as Camilla's fury boiled over, Catherine faced another, even more personal betrayal from someone she least expected. Caught between his wife and his father, William found himself trapped in the cruelest choice of his life, and his silence spoke volumes. Shortly after the fury in the banquet hall had died down and Camilla retreated to her war room, Charles quietly summoned his son into a shadowed corner of the palace. His words came quickly, almost desperate, his hands gripping William's arm with unexpected force. "You must reason with her," he implored. "She respects you. She listens to you. Tell her to step back before this destroys everything." William stood frozen, his throat dry, torn between the loyalty owed to the man who had raised him and the love he had sworn to the woman now at the center of the storm. Later that night, he found Catherine in their private quarters, where the distance between them felt more suffocating than the chaos outside. He sat beside her, searching her face for any trace of doubt, and in a voice barely louder than a whisper, pleaded, Don't let this tear us apart." Catherine didn't flinch, but her silence spoke louder than any answer he might have wanted. Their words became sharp in the days that followed. Private arguments flared behind closed doors, her quiet determination clashing against his quiet fear. He accused her of putting herself above the family. She accused him of being too weak to stand with her when it mattered. He reminded her of Camilla's pain, and she reminded him of the people's will. The words were cruel at times, but worse was the silence that followed when neither could find the strength to speak at all. Meanwhile, Camilla, ever watchful, seized the crack forming between them. In hushed conversations that somehow always reached Catherine's ears, Camilla suggested to William that he could still fix this, that he could still sway the vote, and still protect the monarchy from the humiliation of Catherine's rise. "They'll forgive you," she murmured, her voice heavy with calculation, "if you just put an end to this now." And then came the night when Catherine could bear his silence no longer. She turned to him with a fire in her eyes that even he had never seen before and demanded, "Are you with me or against me?" The question lingered in the air, sharp as a blade, cutting through whatever illusion of unity remained. He said nothing. He simply turned away, retreating into the shadows of the room, leaving Catherine standing there, visibly shaken yet more determined than ever. But while her marriage wavered, Catherine's resolve hardened and she took a step that stunned even her fiercest critics. In a moment of pure defiance, Catherine silenced the room and delivered a speech that no one, least of all Camilla, expected. Word had already spread like wildfire that Catherine had demanded an emergency audience with the press and Commonwealth leaders. At first, whispers dismissed it as another strategic gesture, an attempt to soothe tensions before they erupted beyond repair. But the truth was far more audacious. When she entered the hall that morning, she carried herself not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty of someone who knew she had nothing left to lose, and everything to fight for. The room fell silent as she stood at the podium, a storm of flashbulbs illuminating the stern faces of delegates and advisors alike. When she spoke, her words were measured, calm, yet laced with steel. "I accept the trust you've placed in me and I will not betray it," she began, each syllable striking like a hammer against the brittle veneer of tradition. Her tone was not combative, but resolute, echoing across the chamber and through the cameras that broadcast her defiance to the world. Her voice cracked only once as she spoke of Diana's legacy, of the pain she endured in this very institution, and of the promise Catherine herself made not to let history swallow her into silence. For a moment, her eyes glistened with tears, but she did not falter. Instead, she straightened her back and delivered her sharpest line yet, her gaze sweeping the room. "And to those who seek to divide us," she said, her words deliberate and cutting without naming names, "you will not succeed. We will not allow it." Her words hung in the air like a challenge no one dared to answer. And then, slowly at first, came the sound of applause. Not polite, not obligatory, but thunderous, roaring even. It began with one corner of the room, and soon spread until even those who had once stood firmly with Camilla found themselves rising to their feet. The applause roared so loud it nearly drowned out the murmured curses from the back of the hall, where cameras caught Camilla herself standing stiffly, her face drained of color. In one fluid motion, she turned sharply and walked out, the sharp clack of her heels swallowed by the storm of cheers left in her wake. But just when it seemed Catherine had secured her place, an unexpected revelation surfaced and threatened to unravel everything. A hidden dossier slipped under Catherine's door late at night, revealed a secret so devastating it could topple her before she even ascended. The applause from her defiant speech still echoed in her mind when she returned to her quarters that evening, exhausted but unbroken. Yet waiting for her on the dressing table was an envelope unmarked, its edges crisp, as though it had only just been placed there. She stared at it for a moment, uneasy, before finally tearing it open. Inside, her hands shook as she pulled out a series of documents. At first, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. But as her eyes moved over the pages, the blood drained from her face. The papers detailed emails, phone transcripts, and financial records, all pointing to a so-called shadow campaign, orchestrated in her name. According to the dossier, her closest advisor had been meeting secretly with Commonwealth representatives for months, making promises and offering favors to secure the vote in her favor. The suggestion was clear, chilling, and damning. The entire vote had been manipulated. Catherine's stomach knotted as she whispered aloud, "I didn't authorize this." The words tasted hollow even as they left her lips. She scanned page after page, each accusation more damning than the last, her mind racing through every conversation she'd had in the weeks before the summit, searching for any hint that could explain this. But nothing came. She thought of Camilla immediately, of her searing glare, her whispered vow that, "This isn't over." Was this her doing? Had Camilla planted the dossier as a final act of vengeance to discredit her? Or, more terrifying still, was it real? Her heart pounded as she thought of the press, the cameras, the chants outside the palace gates. How long would it take before these pages found their way into the hands of those who would delight in tearing her down? Would the very people who had lifted her so high now turn on her? For the first time in weeks, she felt truly cornered. A voice in her head told her to burn the papers, to deny everything, to shield her family from what was coming. But another voice, quieter but unrelenting, urged her to come clean, to face the storm before it consumed her completely. She sat there in silence for what felt like hours, the weight of the choice pressing on her like stone. The walls that had seemed so triumphant earlier now felt like a prison. She knew that whatever she decided, there would be no going back. And as the palace braced for the fallout, the final twist arrived, and it was nothing short of catastrophic. On the eve of her would-be coronation, Catherine faced a devastating ultimatum that would test her faith, her marriage, and her very future as queen. It was past midnight when a royal aide arrived at her door, summoning her to the king's private chambers. The corridors, normally bustling with attendants even at odd hours, were eerily empty. When she entered the room, she found Charles already waiting, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Camilla stood at his side, her expression unreadable but her presence impossible to ignore. Without preamble, Charles spoke, his voice grave, heavy with both authority and sorrow. "This cannot continue," he began. "You must make a choice tonight." On the table before him lay a single parchment, the words already penned. He explained, almost pleadingly, that if she withdrew quietly now, the family could begin to heal. That if she stepped aside, the scandal could be buried, the Commonwealth appeased, and the monarchy preserved. His eyes glistened as he said it, but his words carried the weight of a command disguised as a plea. "Or," he continued after a long pause, "you can go through with it and risk it all." The silence was suffocating, but Camilla quickly broke it. She leaned forward just enough for her words to reach Catherine, her whisper deliberate, cruel. "They'll never truly accept you," she murmured. "Even if you win, you'll always be an outsider. Always." Her eyes sparkled with malice, her smirk daring Catherine to prove her wrong. Catherine stood there, her breath shallow, yet her resolve hardening with every word hurled at her. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no tremor, only conviction. She looked first at Charles, then at Camilla, before declaring in a tone that left no room for doubt, "Then let history judge me." The room fell into stunned silence. Even Camilla blinked, momentarily taken aback by the unwavering defiance in Catherine's eyes. Charles, too, seemed to age before her as he let out a slow, resigned breath and reluctantly nodded his head, signaling that the decision was made. There would be no turning back now. Without another word, Catherine turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing in the stillness as she left the chamber. Ahead of her, the coronation hall loomed, a place where she would either be crowned or condemned in front of the world. The final haunting image of her walking alone into that uncertain destiny would stay etched in memory, a symbol of both rebellion and sacrifice. And so the world held its breath, waiting to see if Catherine's bold defiance would shatter the monarchy or crown her as its most unexpected queen. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.